Welcome back, everyone. This is Nev's Mad Theories. This time around, I would like to talk about Captain America, the Laziest Avenger. Man, that can't be right. Steve has dedicated his entire life to being a hero, and he deserves to end up with Peggy Carter. A happy ending, right? I mean, he has done more than enough work for not only Earth, but now also the universe after the events of Endgame. And after years of temptation to give it up or even settle down, maybe with Agent 13, his potential niece, he constantly resists those urges and instead does what is best for everyone else. This makes him hands down the most honorable character in the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe. But this video is about how he finally chose to be selfish and lay down the shield, and also how could that even be possible? Yo, I feel like I shouldn't have to tell you this, but major spoiler warning for Endgame. Come on, just go watch it. So, multiple timelines, realities, even character arcs can be confusing, but I feel like Endgame brought that to a whole new level with this film. We hear multiple times throughout this feature that time travel does not work like that, mainly in reference to the Back to the Future movies. So, we see Steve entering the quantum realm to return the borrowed Infinity Stones, and then he shows up seconds later as some old dude on a bench? Huh? Was it a poetic ending for a beloved hero? Yes. Was it a tear jerking moment that was a better alternative than seeing Steve getting decapitated by Thanos? Decapitated? Yes. But it was also really confusing and left some of us scratching our heads about the whole situation. So check it out. The Steve from our timeline, the main MCU storyline, went into the quantum realm. His mission was to return all of the Infinity Stones to the exact moment where they were taken from. And from our perspective, the same Steve came back seconds later, old as shit, after obviously choosing to spend the rest of his days as a happy go lucky stay at home husband slash dance partner. How? A few different scenarios come to my mind when trying to imagine how this might have gone down. At the end of Endgame, the very last clip shows Steve dancing with Peggy Carter. I'm going to dive into a few different thoughts as to how this could be possible. It might get confusing, so I broke it down into a few different sections and also refer to the characters from their place and time. Don't worry, you'll catch on. Scenario number one, which I am calling the sacrifice play. This also ties into my mad theory for this week, but I'll get to that in a minute. The Steve we know, now in a different reality, was with Peggy Carter after the war, but before the Captain America of that reality was out of the ice. In 1945, Steve had just crashed the plane in the ocean. Everyone thought he was dead. The scene we saw was with Steve and Peggy dancing, presumably in 1945 after the end of World War II, based off of the music that was playing, the door swinging wide open, maybe signifying that they live in a safer time where they don't need to worry about security, and also the fact that Peggy Carter looked considerably younger than she did in the 1970s version of her when Tony and Steve were stealing the Tesseract from the Hydra base, which means that the current day Captain America would still be frozen. I can't imagine Steve or Peggy simply ignoring the fact that Captain America is still alive as a capsicle. I mean, what happened? Steve showed up on the front doorstep and was like, "Hey girl, what's up? I'm not dead." And she was like, "Oh my god, Steve, you're alive. We're going to tell everybody." And he's like, "No, no, 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 no. You can't tell anybody because I'm from the future." I mean, is that how it really played out? I can't. I don't think that Peggy would be okay with leaving Captain America frozen in the ice for another 70 years. So if they acted on that information, that means that the Steve from the 1945 reality would be rescued years early, and then that could possibly change the events of the 1945 reality to something different from the reality that our Steve came from, which also means duplicates in the same timeline. My first thought went to the fact that 1945 Steve might not be too happy with the 2023 Steve hooking up with his lover. Let's think back to Steve versus Steve and NYC. I felt like I was at the opening of Tekken 4 again. So, what if the 2023 Steve saved 1945 Steve from the ice and then continued to live his life as he did in 2023, being a hero, therefore allowing the 1945 Steve to live out a happy life instead of experiencing the same agony and countless battles that 2023 Steve had to endure? Now, let's be real, 2023 Steve has suffered endlessly in his lifetime. He lost Bucky twice, he lost Sam once, he lost Peggy Carter twice, he was frozen in ice, and when then he woke up, he had to fight a bunch of people, and then his girlfriend died of old age. Also, he lost Tony and Natasha as well at the end. He might be okay with sacrificing himself so that a younger and less damaged Steve could live out the perfect version of their lives, which would be making it home after the war and getting the girl, obviously. Could it be possible that old Steve that we saw at the end of Endgame wasn't the same Steve that went into the quantum realm to begin with? That is my mad theory for this week. I do have a few points I need to make about this sacrifice play first. Firstly, Thanos destroyed Cap's shield in the final battle, correct? So, how did Steve turn over the shield to Sam at the end of the movie in an almost flawless state? I mean, he had it in a custom made carrying case. Definitely not the same shield. It's not like Steve could present himself to Howard Stark in the past and ask for a new one, nor would he be able to borrow it or steal it from the Captain America of the past, which would need it for all of the battles of the future and also against Thanos and Endgame again, right? It would still be broken at the end of that cycle if it played out the same. So, where did this shield come from? My second point, if time travel doesn't work like that, how could Cap travel to the past and not change the events of Endgame? Well, as Hulk explained it, he said, if you travel to the past, that becomes your future. Your old present becomes the past, which can't now be changed by your new future. So basically it explains that Steve could return to 1945 and it would not necessarily affect the timeline that he came from. And that whole speech was just a setup to help us understand this process. But in the 1945 reality, most likely the same timeline would unfold anyway. Endgame, Thanos, Hydra, etc. So couldn't Steve Z cause a ripple in that reality by being there, similar to what the Ancient One mentioned to Bruce in the NYC scene, being a branch in the reality? And if the line, which can't be changed by your new future, were true, how would he show up on the bench? Wouldn't that contradict the explanation that Bruce gave? It changed the old past to a new future. Young Steve showing up as old Steve equals past changed by your new future, meaning time travel does work like that, making it more like Back to the Future than they had originally thought. And now, my third point, this could mean that they were in a time loop, as Bruce Banner once complained about during Age of Ultron, if you remember. Meaning that two Steves have always existed in the same timeline due to the events of Endgame. I'm not sure where this time loop started, or if that means that the Doctor Strange vision was actually 14 million to 2 chance of that happening because of Steve being in the past and then also being alive to hand over the shield almost 100 years later. So confusing. This still doesn't explain how the shield would be in perfect condition though, unless 2023 Steve took it from 1945 Steve, which would then change the events of Endgame in that reality. Cap with no shield, even in the past, equals a branch in the known reality. This brings me to scenario number two, which I am calling TLA. That's a three-letter acronym for the laziest Avenger. I gotta give my brother props for that joke from back in the day. If there were duplicate Steves in the same timeline, one of which was frozen and the other sitting around playing chess in a pack somewhere, that's just dumb. I'm sorry. I can't imagine Steve from 2023 sitting around raising children in a world where he knows that Hydra has taken over S.H.I.E.L.D., right? Or, as mentioned before, another version of himself being frozen in the North Atlantic somewhere. Which the second part will be a little bit easier because it's like, hey, Peg, there's a duplicate version of me. He's currently frozen in the ice. We need to leave him there because he's going to fulfill this loop where he defeats this one big purple dude that is from space here in the future. Even if something goes wrong, my past doesn't change my future, so we're good. We're good, boo. But the time is going to come where another version of me is going to come out of the ice. You're going to be old, and then you're going to have to pretend like I'm dead and that you have amnesia or something. Just, we're going to need you to step it up when that time comes. Do you honestly think Steve would do that? I don't, especially with his current track record in the movies thus far. This is why I'm calling this video The Laziest Avenger. Because even though Cap has put in the work, it just doesn't make sense to me that he would give it all up, regardless of whether he deserves it or not. Of course he deserves it. But come on. I guess if you look at it from the sense of him going back in time after the events of Endgame as inevitable, meaning that it was meant to be like that in this loop, maybe, but that just doesn't work for me. I need to know more. The third and final scenario is my favorite. Captain America, Time Hero. It's got a nice ring to it. Could be a movie in the future. Who knows? All right, folks. What happened to the time space GPS that Tony built for the 2023 Avengers? Cap used it to travel back in time, and then when he returned, all he handed over was a perfectly fine shield. It's like, dude, you've obviously been messing with time travel. Cough it up. Give us the GPS. And what would old Steve be like? No, I haven't. Uh, now, if they show us a scene where he is standing around dancing and enjoying life, he obviously used an extra batch of the Pym particles to get himself safely to that place. I assume, due to the music and other small hints that I mentioned earlier, that it was around 1945 when World War II ended. But where exactly is he in time when they are dancing? Say it was the 1970s version, and Peggy was like, you know what, I'm going to get these gray hairs colored for my time traveling lover. Anyone could buy a record player and play that old music. He had to go back to return the Tesseract to 1970 anyway. When he was there in the base, he could have possibly ran into Peggy Carter in the hallways. I mean, how hard is that to imagine? Or, or maybe this time the super spies noticed him through the very thin glass of Peggy's office window. He might have creeped a little too hard on his second trip, therefore getting exposed. As for the amount of Pym particles remaining, since they saved Hank Pym in Endgame, I thought maybe Pym might be okay with funding the particles for the return trip of saving the known universe. But from what we know of Hank Pym in the previous films, he wouldn't hand over his secret recipe so easily. Maybe now that Tony Stark is dead, he always had a thing against the Starks. He's like a Lannister. While Steve was there in 1970, he could easily pull the same prank on Dr. Pym to steal some more particles for his next jump through the quantum realm. That could be a forever pit stop of being able to jump into 1970, steal a bunch of Pym particles, jump out. I mean, perfect time hero setup right there. Which could lead Steve to needing to return the Tesseract first and getting the particles while he was there. This is relevant information because if he returned the Tesseract first, the most likely place he's at the end of the movie would be the 1945 option. Completing the mission and then jumping to a time where him and Peggy could resume their love before the plane crashed into the ocean. The time hero scenario is my favorite because he could have possibly handed over the time space GPS to the 1945 version of Steve once he got out of the ice, which could lead us to having our regular Captain America back. Except he's more like the new Gamora, not knowing the same love, friendship from his fellow heroes, not having developed those relationships yet. Or even a dark and evil version of the character, which would be awesome, that could pop in and out of time, similar to the Time Hero version, just beating up other heroes instead of villains, right? But we all know that Chris Evans is done with the character, and he says he doesn't plan on coming back anytime soon. In an interview with ScarJo, I think he said, he could possibly reprise his role, but it would have to truly credit the character and also have to be a really good reason for him to return. So I doubt we will be seeing Chris Evans as Captain America anytime soon, other than maybe flashbacks or more school videos and Spider Man detention, etc. Still, we never saw Steve hand over the time space GPS or quantum suit. This could potentially set up a new threat or reap some havoc on alternate timelines. My mad theory for this video is that maybe the old Steve isn't actually the same Steve that went into the quantum realm. This is an absolutely ridiculous idea, right? But if you think about it, it's not impossible. I wanted to mention earlier my thoughts about how Steve might not age the same way as regular humans do after receiving the super soldier serum. This might be how they could make the switch at some point in time. And if my ideas weren't crazy, the channel would be called Nev's Rational Theories. And now, the long awaited summary of this video. If you're still listening, thank you so much, and I hope you've enjoyed it so far. I want to jump into the fact that I love this movie, and I don't want my criticism to come off as negative in any way. I think they decided to go with this ending so that we as fans could see that hard work is rewarded with happiness. And also, this is just a good way for them to put an awesome character to rest. Think about it, they could have easily had Steve hand over the shield to Sam at his normal age. But at that point, we would probably just be speculating on the return of the normal Captain America at some point down the line. The way they went is more of a final glimpse of a fading character with no return in sight. I am happy with this ending. Steve finally has a place of his own to go and settle down. He's always been the odd man out when it came to having a personal life. Obviously, I do believe that it's a confusing way to leave it, though. That's why I need to throw out some ideas on how it could possibly go down. I'm probably completely wrong, and none of the listed information might play into any of the stories going forward, but who knows? Maybe as a what if episode at the very least. This is what we have, and I am definitely excited to see how they advance through the events of Endgame going into the future of these films. Thankfully, they will no longer be able to use time travel as an scapegoat. Or at least, I hope they never go back to it. Might as well be 3 different storylines about Phoenix. Ooh, sick burn. I imagine that Steve will have a quick cameo somewhere in the next few phases, and maybe shed some light on how he pulled off this second time heist. But if they never touch the character again, I guess this was the finish line for the first Avenger. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please like, share, and subscribe. Send it to some of your friends. Leave me some comments. Tell me how I'm doing. I don't know exactly what I'm going to do for my next video, but I am working on it, I promise. Thank you so much. Have a great evening.